Yeah, so gold is at 90-ish plus billion of AUM in their ETFs. So here we are. Took gold 20 years to get here. We're going to do this in 3-4 months, maybe.
When you talk about sovereign nations adding Bitcoin to their central bank, effectively, the few people who are telling the mining story are not including that part, right? We don't hear,
exactly.
It's talked about as this future theoretical narrative that might happen far down the road, that some central bank somewhere is going to add Bitcoin to the balance sheet. And you're basically saying that that's exactly what's happening.
In this video interview, we're joined by business executive and CEO of Marathon Digital Holdings, Fred Thiel, as he breaks down everything Bitcoin related from the ETFs to mining in a post-halving world. He also touches on nation-state involvement in mining and what he believes the future of mining will be. Fred explains that this bull run is different from previous bull runs. Historically, Bitcoin usually breaks its previous all-time highs only after the halving and proceeds to run from there. This time, Bitcoin has already set a new ATH weeks before the halving and is slowly reapproaching that landmark. Fred explains the reason for this and how it's related to the ETFs and Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy. He also discusses institutional and nation-state adoption of Bitcoin. Let's dive in to hear it all.
And Bitcoin mining is a hot topic right now because we got the halving coming and we're at all-time highs. So it's a rare situation that we really haven't had before. Is it different this time?
It's certainly different. I mean, last time when you think about it, halving came, dip in price of Bitcoin, scramble, and then Bitcoin went on its progression upwards. The ETF has thrown everything all the rules out, right? Because you have a vacuum cleaner that's just sucking up all the available Bitcoin right now. And between the ETF and Michael Saylor, if you look at how the market has responded, I believe, you may know this better than I do, but the AUM held by Bitcoin ETFs right now is somewhere approaching 40-ish billion dollars, which is approaching 50% of the gold. It's higher.
Yeah, I think it's actually, yesterday was 53 and we're recording here on Friday, so it went up even slightly. It's probably in the 54, 55, including GBTC. So pretty wild.
Yeah. So gold is at 90-ish plus billion of AUM in their ETFs. So here we are. Took gold 20 years to get here. We're going to do this in 3-4 months, maybe. Yeah, and this week or the end of last week, I believe somebody reported that there had been 8 transactions of over 500 Bitcoin each. That's pretty large volumes, considering a normal day in Bitcoin is $20 billion of trading. We're now trading close to 50 billion a day of Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of, because the ETFs are cash settled T+1, I think there's a certain amount of potential market games that are being done by hedge funds and others where they can go in, buy ETFs, and then the market closes on Friday. The ETF has to buy the Bitcoin on Monday. Bitcoin price is going to rally over the weekend, right? Then you short that Bitcoin. So I think the market is learning about it. If the CFTC would allow futures that were commodity settled, I was speaking with a trader yesterday and he said, Bitcoin would just run because people would just buy futures, sit on the Bitcoin, take delivery of it, right? And it would just run. So I think we're in for a very volatile market. You saw the swing the other day, it was a 10% swing. I think we're going to see a lot of that as you get this kind of demand that needs to be fulfilled. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of coins come on the market. You're going to see a lot of OTC desks doing a lot of trading. The exchanges are still going to be tight. I know we get frequent calls from the institutional desks at exchanges just saying, hey, where can we find Bitcoin?
So far, Fred Thiel has discussed why this halving is different from any others before it. He's even predicted that the Bitcoin ETFs could reach and surpass the market cap of the gold ETFs in a matter of months. He's also shed some light on potential manipulation by Wall Street firms, but he's assured us that the market is adapting to it, suggesting we'll see less of it going forward. He last touched on how much the demand for Bitcoin has risen. Next, he segues into how sovereign nation states, in an attempt to meet their demand for Bitcoin, are moving into mining. Sit back as we bring you more clips from the interview.
The sovereigns are the single biggest competitors to the large public miners because they're really not interested in the cost to mine. They're looking to mine Bitcoin because they want to hold Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And if you hold Bitcoin as a reserve asset, you need to be able to ensure you can transact your Bitcoin. The only way to be able to ensure you can transact your Bitcoin is to mine it yourself. So, there's 1 million Bitcoin plus or minus left to be mined between now and 2140. No sovereign nation is going to sink $1 billion into infrastructure to go mine Bitcoin because they're thinking they're going to mine that 1 million Bitcoin because their pro rata share will be a much smaller piece of that. So this is all about nation state security and treasury management. And I think what we're going to see is you've seen a huge amount of gold being purchased by central banks, these nations, because they don't want to be dollarized or they want to reduce their exposure to the dollar. You're going to continue to see that with Bitcoin now. Countries are beginning to, allocate to Bitcoin as a way to hold a certain amount of reserves.
When you talk about sovereign nations adding Bitcoin to their central bank, effectively, the few people who are telling the mining story are not including that part, right? We don't hear
Exactly.
It's talked about as this future theoretical narrative that might happen far down the road, that some central bank somewhere is going to add Bitcoin to the balance sheet, and you're basically saying that that's exactly what's happening here.
Yeah, and let's face it, the U.S. government holds 1% of all the Bitcoin. It's not a reserve asset. I don't think Senator Warren would admit that, certainly. But the U.S. government, because of what they have essentially confiscated from criminal activities, sits on 1% of the available Bitcoin.
To conclude, Fred discusses how he believes the future of Bitcoin mining will unfold.
Eventually, intelligent devices, and I have a big background in the IoT world, intelligent devices like battery systems, like EVs, things that store electricity in volume or things that consume electricity in volume will have intelligence added to them so they can make decisions regarding, do I use grid energy? Do I use battery energy? Do I use my excess energy to mine some Bitcoin? What am I going to do with my energy? And you're going to have essentially distribution of decision-making regarding demand response go down to the device level. And there will be very interesting marketplaces that will sit and trade this energy, because at the end of the day, it's just electrons. When you get a little bit of Bitcoin mining in every single battery, every EV, things like that, you now have a hugely decentralized Bitcoin blockchain where the cost of energy to mine is not a factor in whether you're doing it or not necessarily.
Nation states are already entering into Bitcoin, and they plan to use it as a reserve currency. Their mechanism of choice is to mine it. But what happens when there is a 50% cut in the daily supply, combined with a supply shock due to institutional and nation-state demand? As Fred Thiel has explained, Bitcoin seems primed for an explosion in the coming weeks. The ETF-fueled adoption is only partly responsible for this trend, and the growing interest of nation-states is one that is not immediately obvious to the average investor. But even the US currently sits on around 1% of the total Bitcoin supply, paradoxically, despite their message of cryptocurrency being a tool for money laundering. They've held on to these assets. Fred subtly suggests that this deserves more attention than might initially seem, and might suggest that the US one day plans to use Bitcoin as a reserve asset. Extremely bullish information. What do you think about Fred Thiel's analysis and insight? To see the latest in crypto news, watch this video here.